Hey there, viewers. Ever witnessed someone let slip a secret they were supposed to take to the grave? Drop your stories in the comments. I'm curious what you've seen. Today, a NASA employee just confessed something about Sunita Williams' spacecraft, and what they revealed will leave you absolutely shocked. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Briefing Room Whispers. I've worked in this building for 12 years. It's not the kind of job people notice. No flashy titles, no public interviews, no shiny badges. Just me, a windowless office, a pair of noise-canceling headphones, and more digital files than anyone in their right mind would want to sort through. My official title is something like Internal Communications Analyst, but really, I'm one of the grunts, making sure all the chatter, emails, transmissions, reports stays clean, in order, and where it's supposed to be. Boring? Maybe. Safe? Always. At least, until last week. It started like any other Monday. The fluorescent lights flickering above, stale coffee half warm on my desk, and my monitor blinking with the usual flood of daily transmissions needing sorting. Most of it's routine. Automated status updates, mission briefings, minor incident reports. Nothing out of the ordinary. But buried in the batch that day was something odd. A debriefing transcript marked as confidential, internal eyes only. Nothing unusual about that in itself, except this one didn't have any reference tags, no proper routing labels, just a plain file sitting where it shouldn't have been, like someone accidentally dropped it in the wrong folder. Curiosity's a dangerous thing in a place like this, but I opened it anyway. It was from the recent ISS missions Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore's return aboard the Starliner. I'd been following it loosely like everyone else here. Routine crew flight test, straightforward docking, clean return, or so we'd been told. The transcript was a post-mission debrief, but parts of it had been blacked out. Not the usual security redactions. These were sloppy, sections scrubbed mid-sentence. Timestamps blurred. The conversation itself felt off. There were chunks of dialogue referencing telemetry irregularities, something about sensor discrepancies, and then silence. Whole minutes just missing. I scrolled back up, checked the metadata. The log skipped forward inexplicably, like someone had cut out the middle of the conversation entirely. That wasn't standard. Not for a test mission, not for astronauts like Sunita and Butch who've both done this before without a hitch. I set it aside at first, told myself maybe someone was just being overly cautious with sensitive data. It happens. But the next day, when I got back to my workstation, I noticed something else. The ISS mission logs folder had shrunk. Files I'd seen listed before, the raw audio feeds, the detailed time logs, they were gone, replaced with access notices I hadn't seen before. Tier 5 access only, clearance verification required. Tier 5? I sat back in my chair when I read that. There's no Tier 5 for routine missions. As far as I knew, Tier 4 was the ceiling, reserved for sensitive defense collaborations or top-level experimental tech. But this was just a crude test flight. What the hell needed Tier 5? I glanced around the office, but no one else seemed bothered. Everyone tapping away at their keyboards, eyes glued to screens like usual. I made a mental note to ask around, maybe casually mention it over lunch. Turns out I didn't have to. The whispers started before noon. It's not like people openly gossip in a place like NASA. Too many NDAs, too many badge scanners at every door. But in the break rooms, over half-eaten sandwiches and bad coffee, people let things slip. Someone from IT murmured about certain terminals being flagged last night. Someone from medical hinted at weird protocols coming down from higher-ups about astronaut behavioral assessments. Nothing concrete, nothing anyone wanted to say outright. But one thing kept cropping up, the behavioral flag incident. I cornered one of the junior data techs in the stairwell, someone I'd helped train a few years back. Asked him casually what he'd heard. "Yeah," he said, glancing over his shoulder like we were in a damn spy movie. "Supposedly, mid-mission one of them, Sunita I think, triggered a flag, Standard psychological assessment flagged her for unusual stress markers, but instead of filing it like usual, it got escalated. Escalated to where? I asked. He shrugged. Dunno. Higher than usual? Like off the books? Higher? So now that stuck with me. I've seen hundreds of astronaut evaluations over the years. Stress markers are normal. Microgravity messes with people. Isolation messes with people. They get flagged, talked to, cleared. It's routine. But escalating something like that? That's not routine. That night, long after most of the office had emptied out, I stayed late. My desk lamp cast shadows across the cubicles as I pulled up what mission files I could still access. The redacted debrief, a few stray telemetry snippets, some leftover pre-launch reports no one had scrubbed yet. And that's when I found it. A folder I hadn't noticed before. No official labels, no routing numbers. Just sitting at the bottom of the shared drive like someone had dropped it there and forgotten. Starliner supplementary data, authorized personnel only. My heart thudded a little harder. I clicked. A login prompt flashed up. Not the usual one. Tier 5. Access required. I stared at the screen. I shouldn't have even seen the folder, let alone been able to attempt access. My clearance wasn't low, but it wasn't Tier 5. I tried anyway, out of some dumb instinct. Typed in my credentials, waited. For a second it looked like it was processing. Then the screen went black. New message flashed. Do not encourage. No buttons, no way to back out. Just those 3 words glowing coldly on my monitor. I sat there for a long minute, palms starting to sweat before slowly shutting the machine down. When I turned it back on later, the folder was gone. Like it had never been there at all. The next day, nothing was said. No one from IT showed up at my desk. No higher-ups knocking on my door. Business as usual. But the whispers kept going. Quieter now. More careful. And me? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was a basic ISS mission being treated like classified material? What had Sunita seen or done up there that made people bury the logs, redact conversations, and slap Tier 5 access on everything related? I didn't have answers yet. But I was starting to realize whatever it was, nobody wanted it getting out. Chapter 2. The Starliner's Return. Something off about that landing. I've been doing recovery work for close to 20 years now. Contracts come and go, NASA calls, sometimes private companies, but the routine is always the same. You get the coordinates, you show up at the drop zone, you wait for the big tin can to come falling out of the sky, and then you do the checklist. Inspect the capsule, secure the crew, run your diagnostics, clear the debris. It's mechanical. Predictable. That's why I like it. There aren't surprises in this line of work, or at least there aren't supposed to be. The Starliner came down like clockwork that afternoon. Clear skies, good telemetry, everything aligned. I'd been out at the site since before dawn, clipboard in hand, boots kicking up dust in the empty expanse, while the rest of the team ran through standard setup. There were about 24 of us in total. Engineers, recovery techs, a few senior NASA people overseeing things. We'd done this before, most of us more times than we could count. I remember standing there, watching that silver dot streak across the sky, growing larger by the second. The parachutes deployed right on cue, the capsule descending slower now, almost graceful. Everything on schedule. But as soon as the capsule hit ground, I noticed the first thing that didn't sit right. Usually after touchdown, we're the first ones on the scene. Quick checks on the integrity of the heat shield, exterior assessments, make sure no serious breaches or damage before opening the hatch. But before we could even get halfway there, a black van rolled up fast. No markings, tinted windows, and out stepped a crew in full hazmat gear. Now, don't get me wrong, we're used to seeing people in containment suits if there's concern about fuel leaks or off-gassing. Protocol covers that, but these weren't standard NASA suits. No insignias, no unit patches, just blank white gear, visors down, and they moved like they'd done this before, like they had a reason to be here no one else knew about. The NASA supervisors didn't question it. They waved them through without a word. I glanced at one of the other engineers, gave him a look, but he just shrugged and kept working. No one wanted to be the first to ask. The capsule itself, well, that was the second thing. Up close, something felt wrong. The scorch marks trailing along the hull weren't uniform. Normally, you get a predictable spread of re-entry burn. We've got charts for that, thermal models. But this time, the blackened streaks twisted along the metal unevenly, almost like something had impacted mid-descent. A pattern I couldn't place. I ran my hand along one of the larger marks, felt the edge. It wasn't from atmosphere burn alone. There was a strange texture to it, like melted metal, but hardened in jagged swirls. I wanted to log it, mark it down, but before I could get a proper look, one of the hazmat crew brushed past and started setting up perimeter equipment. Geiger counters, chemical sniffers, electromagnetic sensors, the kind of kit reserved for more exotic concerns. They worked fast, efficient, like they didn't need instructions. And then the hatch opened. Usually the crew steps out for a quick photo op, smiles all around, medical checks handled on site. That's the routine, but not today. The second the hatch was cracked, 2 more unmarked vehicles pulled up and a medical team in dark uniforms moved in. No logos, no public relations officers in tow, no cameras. They pulled Sunita and Butch out and didn't even let them stand upright. Both of them, strapped onto gurneys, wheeled straight past us without so much as a nod. From what I could glimpse, they looked off. Sunita's eyes were open, unfocused, scanning the sky like she was following something we couldn't see. Butch had his head turned to the side, face pale, jaw tight. Neither of them spoke. One of the younger techs beside me muttered something under his breath, something about how this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I didn't answer. Just watched as the medical team loaded them into the back of the black van, slammed the doors shut, and peeled away without waiting for anyone's clearance. We went back to the capsule, trying to finish the standard assessments, but half of us were distracted now. You could feel it in the air. Something was wrong. I walked around to where the equipment panels usually get detached, expecting to find the standard containers ready for processing. Instead, there were crates. Matte black, no labels, heavy duty, reinforced, not NASA issue. I watched as a separate team, again no uniforms, just black gloves and quiet movements, started packing up sections of the capsule's internal hardware into these crates. Cables, panels, even pieces of the outer hull. None of it logged, none of it routed through the normal processing bays. One of the crates had its lid slightly ajar as they moved it. Inside, I caught a glimpse of what looked like an instrumentation module, except the casing was warped, edges buckled in a way that didn't make sense. Like something inside the capsule had compressed the metal outward, not from impact, from pressure. That was when I heard them. 2 of the officials, standing a little ways off from the recovery site perimeter, talking low but not low enough. "We need to keep the onboard anomaly contained," one of them said. The other nodded. "It's not just hardware. Whatever the crew was exposed to, we can't risk it spreading." I froze, pretending to check something on my clipboard, but my ears burned. Anomaly, exposure, spread. Those words don't get thrown around lightly out here. The rest of the recovery wrapped up fast after that. Most of the debris was scooped up into the black crates and loaded into trucks headed where, I don't know. None of it went to the usual NASA facilities. The vehicles left in a convoy. No flight manifests, no tracking sheets. Back at the processing station, when the reports were filed, there was no mention of the hazmat suits, no mention of the crates, no photos of the recovery team. Just a clean, sterilized entry. Starliner returned safely, crew undergoing routine debrief and medical observation. Standard boilerplate. But I was there. I saw what I saw, and none of it felt standard. Chapter 3. Medical technician's unsettling observation. I didn't think much of it when I got assigned to post-mission evaluations. It wasn't my first time doing the rounds after a crew came back, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be anything out of the ordinary. Routine work, they called it. Just keep an eye on vitals, monitor muscle loss, check for cognitive degradation. Space messes with the human body, always has, and that's where people like me come in. Low-level, mid-tier technician, buried somewhere in the long chain of command, doing the stuff no one higher up wants to bother with. You don't ask questions, you take the readings, file the reports, move on to the next assignment. At least that's how it's supposed to go. I remember the day they brought Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore into the medical wing. No press around, no parade of photographers or reporters, none of the usual noise that follows a successful mission. It struck me as odd, but I figured maybe they were keeping things quiet, maybe because it was just a crew test flight. The official line was that everything had gone smoothly, nothing unusual. But from the second they wheeled Sunita in, something didn't sit right. She looked disconnected. Her eyes didn't quite focus when the doctors leaned over her. She blinked, sure, responded when they called her name, but it felt delayed, like she was hearing them from far away. Butch, on the other hand, seemed fine. Exhausted, yeah, same as anyone who's just re-entered Earth's gravity, but grounded, alert. His reflexes checked out during initial assessments, muscle tone as expected, vitals stable. Sunita, though, the numbers didn't match what I was used to seeing. First, it was her heart rate, elevated 1 minute, dropping the next, like her system couldn't decide whether it was in fight or flight. Blood pressure oscillating unpredictably, reflex tests giving inconsistent responses. She'd miss the knee tap one time, then overreact the next. They chalked it up to disorientation, told me to keep monitoring, that it would stabilize after a few cycles. But it didn't. Over the next 48 hours, the irregularities kept stacking up. Her balance was off, not just from muscle loss. There was something in the way she moved, like her center of gravity had shifted slightly, her steps careful but unsteady, almost as if she didn't fully trust the ground beneath her feet. I logged every observation, attached the usual vitals readouts, flagged the file for further review, standard protocol. Except nothing came back. No follow-up requests, no queries from the senior medical staff. My flagged report disappeared into the system like it never existed. I figured maybe it had been routed to a different department, maybe passed along to the psychological evaluation team, but when I checked later there was no trace of it, almost like someone had scrubbed it clean. It gnawed at me. I'd seen returning astronauts with vertigo, space sickness, even minor hallucinations, but nothing like this, and no one was talking about it. Conversations between staff got quieter whenever Sunita's name came up, eyes shifting nervously, people changing subjects. I kept my head down, kept running the tests, but I started staying later than usual, pulling extra shifts just to keep an eye on her. That's when I noticed something else. It was close to midnight, most of the wing dark except for the low glow of monitors and emergency lights. I was finishing up data entry when I passed by her room. Through the small glass window, I could see her, sitting upright in bed, no IVs attached, no medical staff nearby. She wasn't asleep. She was staring, no, fixated, on one of the biometric monitors next to her bed. The screen pulsed steadily, displaying her vitals in soft green text, nothing unusual there. But her eyes, they were locked onto it like she was reading something far more complicated, far more important than heart rate numbers. I stood there for a moment, watching. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. Finally, I knocked gently on the door, trying not to startle her. She didn't respond. It wasn't until I walked in, calling her name softly, that she turned toward me, and when she did, I noticed something that made my stomach knot. Her skin, exposed where the hospital gown slipped slightly down her shoulder, bore faint marks. At first, I thought they were bruises, darkened patches along her arms, near her collarbone. But when I looked closer, they weren't random like bruising usually is. The shapes were too clean, too deliberate. They formed almost geometric lines, faint outlines curving at angles beneath the surface. No one had mentioned this. I hadn't seen anything like it in any of the physical assessments. I asked her quietly if she was in pain, if she remembered how she got the marks. She didn't answer, just shook her head slightly, gaze already drifting back to the monitor. I noted it down, took mental snapshots. Something about the symmetry bothered me, like it wasn't something that could have happened during re-entry or in zero-gravity conditions. The next morning, I tried logging the details into her file, attaching a few still images from earlier scans. But when I went to upload them, the system froze. Error message flashed. Access denied. Restricted file. That wasn't supposed to happen. My clearance wasn't high, but basic medical entries always went through. I tried again. Same message. Later that afternoon, while I was prepping supplies in the storeroom, my comm went off. It was one of the senior administrators. He didn't waste time. Said my services were no longer required on this case. No explanation, just that I was being reassigned immediately. Told me to collect my things. It didn't make sense. There'd been no complaints, no performance issues. I pressed him, asked if something was wrong with my reports. He didn't answer, just repeated the directive and hung up. I didn't go back to my workstation right away. Instead, I ducked into the diagnostics room, checked the system one last time. My access had already been downgraded, most of the folders locked, but the scan images I'd seen earlier, the ones showing those faint patterned marks on Sunita's skin, those hadn't been wiped yet. I pulled a copy onto a drive. I knew it wasn't protocol. Hell, it was probably grounds for immediate termination if anyone found out. But something about the way they were burying everything, scrubbing reports, reassigning staff, it felt wrong. Like whatever had happened up there on the ISS, whatever Sunita had come back with, they didn't want anyone knowing. As I left the wing, walking past the darkened corridors and empty observation rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that the medical data wasn't just being hidden. It was being erased. And the marks I saw on her arms, they weren't bruises. They were something else entirely. Chapter 4. The Scrubbed Mission Logs. Archiving isn't glamorous. No one ever dreams of growing up to be the guy shuffling files into digital storage, cross-referencing logs, making sure every second of every mission ends up exactly where it's supposed to be. It's invisible work, mechanical. But it's also necessary. People trust the data will always be there, accurate, complete, untouched. I'm not a scientist running experiments in orbit. I just make sure everything we record, the footage, the telemetry, the audio logs, gets cataloged, backed up, and filed away. It's supposed to be straightforward, clean, nothing missing. Which is why the moment I noticed gaps in the Starliner mission logs, I knew something was wrong. It started small, a routine audit, something I did twice a week without fail. The incoming folder for the ISS mission was supposed to contain a full set, launch sequences, onboard footage, docking procedures, the entire span of the mission from Earth to orbit and back. But when I pulled up the feed list, there were clear holes. Segments marked complete, but when I checked them, they weren't there. Particularly around the ISS docking window. Nearly 4 hours of missing footage, right when the Starliner was supposed to be locking in with the station. That didn't make sense. Docking sequences are some of the most heavily recorded procedures. Multiple camera angles, internal and external telemetry overlays, time-stamped logs, even redundant backups. Redundancy is gospel around here. We don't lose data. At first, I thought it might be a transfer error. Maybe one of the file sets hadn't synced correctly. But when I went digging through the redundant backups, our fail-safes, tucked away on isolated drives, the same gaps appeared, cleanly cut out. No corrupted files, no transfer anomalies, just missing. I brought it up casually with one of the other archivists over coffee, asked if he'd seen anything unusual in the latest mission files. He gave me a tight smile, said everything looked routine on his end, but the way he avoided meeting my eyes told me he'd noticed something too, and wasn't about to talk about it. That only made me more curious. I waited until after hours to dig deeper. The office cleared out around 6, everyone eager to beat traffic, and that left me alone with the servers. I bypassed the public-facing database and went straight for the cold storage logs, the raw feeds NASA keeps, but doesn't always push forward. It's tedious stuff, long stretches of silence, blinking monitors, astronauts floating through daily routines, but it's complete, or at least it should be. I queued up the ISS mission folder, scanned through the file tree. There were timestamps where there shouldn't have been gaps. Whole swaths of the docking day video feeds gone, telemetry reports showing blank readings, sensor logs cut off midline. I loaded one of the few remaining audio logs from just before the missing window, half expecting to find standard comm chatter. Instead, there was something off. It started normal enough. Butch Wilmore's voice came through, confirming coordinates, cross-checking alignments. Then a few seconds of static. After that, the tone shifted, voices lower, clipped. I leaned closer, rewinding, playing it back slower. A few words caught in the middle of the noise. Unidentified structure, bearing. Another burst of static. External proximity alert. Then silence. The log cut clean. No follow-up, no debrief, nothing to indicate what they'd seen. That wasn't normal. Even if they'd encountered debris or something unexpected, standard procedure was to log it, document every detail. Instead, it felt like someone had deliberately sliced the audio, leaving only fragments. I felt the hairs on my arms prick up. I ran a checksum on the file metadata, checking for alterations. Sure enough, the timestamps didn't match. The log had been modified post-mission, days after the crew's return. I double-checked access records. No trace of who made the edits. By now, my stomach was a knot. I shouldn't have pushed further, but I couldn't stop myself. There was one more place to check. The older servers, the backups no one touched anymore, where early mission data sometimes lingered before being scrubbed for storage space. I had clearance. It wouldn't flag anything, at least not immediately. It took a while, but I found it. A forgotten folder, labeled simply ISS_EVA_backup_sequence_18.I. Inside were raw telemetry logs. No video, just the numbers. And buried among them, an entry that didn't make sense. EVA initiated, Williams S. Authorization code, unverified. Duration, 4 hours, 13 minutes. Purpose, inspection, external hull integrity. There was no corresponding entry in the main database. No EVA listed publicly for that window, no media reports, no standard clearance forms. Spacewalks don't just happen without clearance. Every minute outside the ISS is choreographed months in advance. I stared at the log. Sunita Williams had initiated an EVA without proper authorization. Alone. Why hadn't this been reported? Why wasn't it anywhere in the mission summary? Scrolling further, another entry caught my eye. Incident report. Unknown debris contact. Assessment pending. No further details. No attached analysis, just those words, logged hours after the EVA concluded. I printed out the log sheets before I could think twice, slipped them into my folder, heart pounding. Something about this felt heavy, dangerous. Like I'd opened a door I wasn't supposed to know existed. I shut down the terminal, wiped my recent search history, packed up for the night. The next morning when I logged in, the servers behaved differently. Sluggish, unresponsive. Files I'd accessed the night before were gone. Whole directories vanished. Then, a pop-up flashed on my screen. Unauthorized access detected. System under maintenance. Please contact admin. My access credentials locked out moments later. I knew enough not to ask questions, not openly. By the time I left the building that afternoon, my stomach still twisted. I was already rehearsing excuses in case anyone came knocking. But I had the printed logs folded carefully in my jacket pocket, the weight of them like a stone pressing against my ribs. Sunita's unauthorized EVA, the missing footage, the unexplained debris contact. They weren't supposed to exist, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one could trace them. But now I had proof, and I couldn't stop wondering why they'd wanted it erased. Chapter 5. Unusual visitors at the facility. The thing about security work is, if you're doing your job right, no one notices you. You stand at your post, scan badges, watch the cameras, keep your mouth shut. You're a fixture, part of the background noise. Most of the time, that's all it ever is. Quiet, predictable. But every now and then something shifts, small at first, barely noticeable, like a ripple spreading under the surface. That's when you pay attention. The facility where they brought Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore after the mission wasn't one I'd worked at long. Contract job, 6 months tops. Enough to pay bills, keep my certifications up to date. Nothing permanent. It wasn't your standard NASA site either. Private sector facility, leased out but still crawling with government types. Strict entry protocols, multi-layered badge access, cameras covering every hallway. You get used to the routine, who's supposed to be there, who's not. The day they brought Sunita and Butch in, things started changing. First, they tightened security around the medical wing. Normally, we had one guard stationed at each hallway junction, eyes on visitor logs, basic medical clearance checks. After the Starliner crew arrived, that tripled. They rerouted personnel entries, sealed off certain sections entirely, put 2 guards outside Sunita's room at all times. No visitors allowed without top-tier clearance, no exceptions. Butch's room had fewer restrictions. He had a few check-ins, standard procedure, a nurse here, a doctor there. He didn't stay long, maybe a week, give or take. One morning he was just gone. No official discharge notice, no media announcement, no family visits. Quietly processed out, no fanfare. Sunita, though, was another story. She stayed longer. Weeks dragged on. No one outside the medical staff got within 10 feet of her. The wing was kept dim, lights lower than usual. Rumors started spreading through the staff. Small things, whispers exchanged during shift changes. Someone claimed they heard shouting from inside her room one night, though no one could confirm. Another guard said he saw one of the attending doctors leave looking pale, shaken. No one wanted to say too much. You could feel it hanging in the air, though. Something wasn't normal. Then the visitors started arriving. Not NASA. Not anyone with the usual agency credentials or badges. Suits, clean, tailored, faces unfamiliar, moving like they owned the place. No names, no identification, just temporary clearance slips punched in manually by upper management. They came in pairs, sometimes threes, always quiet, always straight to the restricted wing, no small talk. I made a habit of watching them, studying the way they interacted, though they didn't blend in the way most government types do. Too polished, too deliberate. Eyes sharp, posture stiff. What struck me most wasn't just their presence, but the way the NASA officials reacted when they showed up. Normally, protocol is protocol. Everyone knows their place, but when these guys came through, the usual supervisors tensed up, voices clipped. I caught snippets sometimes when they passed through the security checkpoint, quick exchanges low enough to make you strain your ears. Words like containment protocols, unauthorized exposurization risks. That last one stuck with me. Psychological destabilization for astronauts? I'd seen plenty of returnees before. Space messes with your head, sure, but we had procedures for that. Debriefs, counseling, adjustment periods. This felt different, like they were preparing for something they couldn't categorize. I remember one night in particular. Late shift, dead quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights. Most of the facility had emptied out, just a skeleton crew left. The black SUVs rolled up out front, same as always. But this time, the visitors weren't alone. Behind them, a separate convoy of trucks pulled in, flatbeds loaded with crates, large, heavy-duty black with reinforced corners. No labels, no manifests. I watched as they backed them up to the loading bay near the medical wing. A couple of us got reassigned to help with perimeter security during the transfer. Standard orders, nothing unusual on paper. But when I asked the shift supervisor where the cargo was headed, he gave me a look like I'd stepped out of line just by asking. Told me not to worry about it, that everything was pre-cleared. Still, curiosity gets the better of you sometimes. As the trucks offloaded, I kept my eyes peeled. The crates were sealed tight, but now and then I caught glimpses of what was inside. Sections of metallic plating, fragments of wiring, structural components. Familiar, but altered. Burn marks twisted in jagged patterns, some parts warped like they'd been compressed from the inside. It clicked after a moment. Starliner debris. But it wasn't being sent to any of the usual NASA processing centers. The routing slips attached to the crates had no listed destination, just a series of internal codes, none of which I recognized. After the trucks pulled away, one of the guards on my team muttered that it didn't feel right. That's when I noticed one of the suits, the visitors, standing off to the side, clipboard in hand, watching us like a hawk. The second he caught me glancing his way, he moved, walked over to the shift supervisor. They exchanged a few tense words. Next thing I knew, I was being pulled aside, told my shift was over early, no explanation. It didn't stop there. The next morning, I got a message to report to administration. Thought maybe it was routine contract renewal, standard check-in. Instead, I was met by one of the senior facility managers and a man I didn't recognize. Clean suit, no badge, eyes cold. He wasted no time. Said there'd been concerns about my behavior during last night's shift, that I'd asked questions outside my clearance level, that my continued assignment here might not be necessary. I pushed back, asked what exactly I'd done wrong, got a thin smile in return. No specifics, just that I should consider myself reassigned effective immediately. Before I left, they had me hand over my key card, sign a few forms, boilerplate stuff, except one of the pages caught my eye. A manifest sheet left sitting on the desk, half obscured by paperwork. I glanced at it just long enough to catch the words printed in the upper corner. Material sample integrity, unknown origin. The clipboard disappeared quickly after that, slid into a drawer before I could get a second look. They walked me out themselves. No one said goodbye. By the time I got back to my apartment, my access credentials had been scrubbed from the system. You learn in this line of work when to keep your mouth shut, but even now, days later, I can't stop replaying those nights in my head. The visitors, the crates, the hushed arguments. The phrase, unknown origin, burned into my brain. Whatever came back down with that Starliner wasn't supposed to be here. And someone was making damn sure it didn't leave. Chapter 6. The employee who couldn't stay silent. I should have known better. After all these years at NASA, I should have known when to keep my head down. You don't spend over a decade working your way up through engineering teams without learning which questions are safe to ask, and which ones will get you quietly benched, your keycard access downgraded without so much as an official memo. But something about this mission, something about how they handled everything after that Starliner came back, just wouldn't sit right with me, and eventually it gnawed at me long enough that I stopped caring about playing by the unspoken rules. I had been part of the systems engineering division for 6 years. My job was simple on paper: oversee performance diagnostics during crewed flights, check for anomalies in propulsion life support, guidance systems. You'd think everything would be ironed out by the time a spacecraft like Starliner got to the crew test phase, but it's never that clean. There's always a stray glitch here or there, a misfiring sensor, an unexpected thruster spike, a communication dropout. It's our job to comb through those details, sort out the noise from the real problems. And that's exactly why what happened during Sunita and Butch's mission didn't sit well. It started with what looked like a minor course correction. We have automated systems built into the Starliner, sure. Redundant layers of control protocols, backup guidance software in case human input falters. But every maneuver, every single adjustment is logged. Inputs are traceable, whether they come from ground control, the crew, or pre-programmed routines. This one wasn't. I noticed it first in the post-mission data review, a brief spike in thruster activity mid-transit, barely lasting a few seconds. The log labeled it as an automated adjustment, nothing flagged as unusual, but when I dug deeper, I couldn't find a corresponding command input. No transmission from ground control authorizing the correction. No crew-initiated override. The system itself registered the movement, but the source, blank, like the spacecraft, made a decision all on its own. I flagged it, thinking maybe someone missed a manual entry. Happens sometimes. Paperwork falling behind the pace of real-time systems management. I passed it up to my supervisor, expecting a quick correction. But I got nothing back. No clarification, no follow-up. That's when I started pulling earlier diagnostic reports from the mission, sifting through everything. Propulsion logs, environmental readings, external proximity sensors. It wasn't just the course correction. There were other little irregularities, readings showing transient electromagnetic interference near the ISS docking window, minor fluctuations in life support pressure that stabilized without intervention, short bursts of unexplained static in the communication logs. Each on its own was easy enough to brush off. Together, it painted a different picture. One report in particular stood out. Logged as a thruster malfunction during orbital positioning, except when I compared it to our fault databases, the behavior didn't match any known malfunction patterns. It didn't fit the failure curves we'd tested for. Odd thing was, that report had originally been flagged as requiring further assessment, but when I checked it again 2 days later, the status had quietly changed to resolved, no further action. No detailed breakdown, no technician sign-off, just resolved. Like it had been decided somewhere above my pay grade that it wasn't worth revisiting. I wasn't naive. I knew how things worked. Technical problems get buried all the time if someone thinks they're minor enough not to rock the boat. But this felt different, bigger, coordinated. Then came the meeting. It wasn't an official sit-down, just a closed-door conversation with 2 senior officials I reported to. I'd requested clarification, wanted to know why these anomalies weren't being investigated further, why logs were vanishing without explanation. Their response? One of them barely looked at me. The other kept his tone even, almost detached. "The less you know, the better," he said. "It's not a technical problem." I remember staring at him, trying to make sense of it. "It's biological." That word hung in the air long after the meeting ended. Biological. I went over it again and again in my head. This wasn't about thruster malfunctions or telemetry gaps. It wasn't about software glitches or faulty wiring. They were treating whatever happened on that mission like a contamination event. Something alive, or something behaving like it. I didn't sleep much after that. A week later, I made the decision that would probably cost me everything. I reached out to an old acquaintance, someone who'd left the agency years ago, now working as an independent journalist. We'd kept in touch loosely over the years, nothing more than the occasional check-in. I knew they'd still have contacts, the kind of network that could keep information quiet long enough to figure out what to do with it. We met in a quiet bar far enough from any familiar eyes. I didn't even know where to start at first, but once I opened my mouth, it all came spilling out. The unprogrammed maneuvers, the missing data, the classified reassignments, the way people who asked questions got shuffled out, access revoked, files scrubbed clean. I told them about the course correction, about the diagnostic logs that made no sense, about how Sunita hadn't come back with the standard post-mission symptoms, how medical files I'd glimpsed were locked tighter than anything I'd seen in years. I told them about that word, biological, and how no one in engineering circles wanted to touch it. I didn't know if I sounded crazy or paranoid by the time I finished, but they listened, didn't interrupt, just nodded, face unreadable. A few days later, I got a message. Unmarked, no sender listed. Attached was a file, heavily redacted, pages and pages of black lines, whole sections missing, but one title caught my eye, printed clearly at the top of the first page. Exposure Containment Protocol, Crew Interaction Timeline. Most of it was useless. Names scrubbed, locations redacted, but enough fragments bled through. References to post-mission isolation periods exceeding standard durations. Mentions of containment breach assessments. A timeline matching the exact days Sunita and Butch had been under observation. But only one name recurring after the first week. Williams, S. The last line chilled me more than anything else. Assessment pending external influences, unresolved. I don't know what they brought back with them, but I know it wasn't just space debris or faulty equipment, and I know they've buried it deep enough that no one outside a very tight circle is ever supposed to understand how close it came to slipping through. I don't know how much longer I'll have my job after this. Hell, I don't know how much longer I'll have my clearance. But some things weigh heavier than a paycheck, and I can't shake the feeling that the real danger isn't what happened up there, but what they're willing to do to make sure no one ever knows. Chapter 7. The Confession Tape Surface. I've worked long enough in this field to know when something's rotten. Most stories, the ones they feed the public, come pre-packaged, smoothed over, easy to digest. The official reports, the press conferences, the handshakes in front of cameras. But behind those polished versions, there's always another layer. The version no one wants written down. The version people whisper about but never commit to paper. I've made a career chasing that second version. And after that conversation with the engineer, I knew I'd stumbled into something far deeper than I'd expected. It wasn't just another case of government mishandling or technical cover-ups. No, this felt deliberate, coordinated. Too many silences, too many files missing, too many people disappearing quietly without a trace. Still, for all the half-answers and buried documents, there hadn't been enough to pull the threads together. Not yet. Then the USB drive showed up at my door. No return address, no note, just a plain black thumb drive sealed inside a small envelope, slid under the door sometime after midnight. For a moment, I thought twice about plugging it in. You learn to be careful when you start digging in places you're not supposed to, but curiosity always wins. I booted up an isolated laptop, disabled every connection, set up the precautions. When the files opened, I froze. Audio recordings, multiple files, labeled by date, each one marked internal meeting, restricted access. No metadata beyond that, no source listed, but I didn't need much more to know what I was listening to. The first file crackled slightly, faint voices filtering through like a poorly tuned radio transmission. I leaned in closer, volume turned up just enough to catch the words. Review of Williams' post-mission assessments shows non-standard neurological activity, fluctuating cognitive patterns inconsistent with standard microgravity readjustment. A pause. Another voice chimed in, lower, measured. She's still exhibiting unresponsive behavior at irregular intervals. No definitive cause identified. Psychological evaluations are inconclusive. The two voices went back and forth, clinical, detached, dissecting her condition like she was just another case file. But it was what came next that made me stop cold. Possible connection to external stimuli encountered during unauthorized EVA. I replayed that line 3 times. each time trying to make sure I'd heard it right. Unauthorized EVA. That lined up with what the archivist told me. The hidden mission logs, the missing footage, the extra vehicular activity no one ever officially reported. The audio shifted, papers rustling, someone clearing their throat. Containment protocols remain active. We're advising no media exposure until cognitive assessments stabilize. Risk factors for escalation remain high. Another file, a different meeting, another set of voices. Tense this time, less clinical, more afraid, though they tried to mask it. One voice I hadn't heard before cut through, sharp, authoritative. We have no precedent for this. Exposure timelines exceed standard biological contamination protocols. We don't know what cognitive alterations may develop long-term. A second voice spoke, quieter but deliberate. Public disclosure is off the table. Any leak risks mass speculation, potential panic. There was silence after that. No one countered, no one argued, just that agreement hanging there, unspoken but final. I sat back, rubbing a hand over my mouth. I'd dealt with plenty of government reticence before. Classified projects, national security clauses, internal failures swept under the rug. But this wasn't bureaucratic caution. This was fear. Genuine, quiet, bureaucratic fear. They weren't just hiding what happened. They were afraid of it. I spent the next few hours piecing together what I had. I laid it all out. The testimonies from the engineer, the technician who noticed Sunita's irregular vitals, the recovery crew who saw the hazmat suits and the black crates. Every loose thread, every report that didn't add up, every word left out of official statements. And woven through it all was the same pattern. Something had happened during that EVA. Something no one had expected. The physiological anomalies, the altered behavior, the unexplainable course corrections. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. Sunita hadn't come back alone. Whether it was something physical, something biological, or something less tangible, they didn't know. And the more I listened to those recordings, the clearer it became that NASA wasn't equipped to deal with it. They were scrambling behind the scenes, locking down files, isolating personnel, keeping the press away, hoping whatever this was would fade quietly without catching public attention. But it wasn't fading. I loaded the final audio file on the USB. The timestamp was recent, only a week old. The voices sounded strained, even more guarded than before. Continued exposure assessment pending. Neural deviations consistent with prior sessions. Another voice cut in, sharper this time. She's remembering more. Fragments mostly, unclear imagery, verbal inconsistencies. If she recalls specifics, silence. And then, flat, almost whispered. If she remembers what she saw, it won't stay contained for long. I sat there in the quiet, the weight of that sentence sinking like a stone. What the hell had she seen? Whatever it was, they were banking everything on her forgetting, on her slipping further away, on her condition being kept behind layers of locked doors and higher clearances. But there was something in those recordings, something in the edge of those voices, that told me they weren't confident. They didn't think it was over. And now, sitting with this drive in my hand, I wasn't sure it was either. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see one of those black SUVs pulled up across the street, someone watching. The paranoia wasn't new. It always creeps in when you get too close, but this time it felt earned. I didn't know yet what to do with what I had, whether to publish it outright, whether to dig deeper, whether to keep following the trail to wherever it ended. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came back with Sunita Williams wasn't meant to be understood, and they were terrified of the day she finally put the pieces together. Chapter 8. One final transmission. I'd spent the better part of the last month buried under files, scraps of testimony, redacted memos, late-night meetings in empty bars, names whispered in passing, access credentials revoked, people reassigned, scrubbed clean from the record. Every person I spoke to, every log sheet and audio fragment I unearthed, pointed back to the same place, a single, jagged hole in the official timeline of Sunita Williams' last mission. 4 missing hours during the ISS docking phase, an unauthorized EVA no one would acknowledge, and silence hanging over it all like a thick fog. But there was something else too, something that had been gnawing at me ever since I listened to those recordings. The way the officials spoke, clipped and cautious, not about technical malfunctions or system failures, those they knew how to manage. It was something deeper, the way they danced around her condition, the containment protocols, the risk of escalation, always circling the same unspoken idea, like saying it out loud might make it real. I had everything I needed to publish. I'd cross-referenced every source, double-checked timelines, the technicians' reports on Sunita's irregular vitals, the recovery crew's accounts of the hazmat suits, the black crates bypassing standard facilities, the engineers' files showing unexplained thruster corrections, the wiped mission logs, the references to debris contact and exposure protocols, and now the audio recordings. Her condition discussed in quiet, clinical tones, the word biological whispered like a curse. But still, the heart of it, the part that mattered, was missing. I didn't have her. I didn't have Sunita's voice. I tried to contact her first through the official channels, requests routed through NASA's press office, no response. Then I reached out through backdoor connections, colleagues who owed me favors, people on the medical staff who'd slipped me scraps of information before. Nothing. The trail went cold faster than I expected. Her discharge, which should have been standard procedure, was missing from all records. No press appearances, no interviews, no post-mission public statements. She hadn't even returned to her home. It was as if she'd vanished. Someone mentioned offhandedly that she'd been relocated. No one could tell me where. An undisclosed facility, no records accessible, moved quietly, far from the public eye. And then 2 days later, the email arrived. No subject line, no sender, no return path traceable, just a blank message body and a single file attached. It took me a while to open it. Something about the timing, the precision of it, made me pause. This wasn't a random leak. Someone had been watching, knew exactly when I was about to pull the trigger. The file was audio, short, only a few minutes long, corrupted in places, static crackling over much of it. I ran it through cleanup software, trying to salvage what I could without distorting it further. When it played, my stomach dropped. It was her voice. Faint, distant, strained, but unmistakably Sunita Williams. The first few seconds were garbled, filled with the familiar background hum of ISIS equipment. Then, her breathing came through, heavy, controlled, but off rhythm. Visual confirmation, proximity unaccounted, not debris. A burst of static swallowed part of the next line. I leaned in closer, headphones pressed tight, isolating the faint fragments. Observing us, no response from ground. External structure, not human. My throat tightened as I replayed it. She didn't sound panicked. That's what struck me most. No fear in her voice, just something colder, flatter, detached. Like whatever she was describing had numbed everything else. The file skipped ahead, more static breaking up the middle. Then at the end, just before it cut out completely, came the last phrase, clear, crisp. It's still with me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the words echoing over and over. It's still with me. All the puzzle pieces I'd gathered, the scrubbed logs, the behavioral flags, the containment protocols, they all snapped into place at once, but not in any way that felt comforting. Every time I thought I'd found the shape of the story, it shifted. It wasn't just about what happened during that EVA. It wasn't just about the missing hours or the malfunctioning thrusters. It was about what she'd brought back, something she couldn't shake loose. And if the people in those meetings were right, if even they didn't fully understand what she'd seen, then maybe it wasn't something she could leave behind. I thought about publishing, thought about dropping everything I had in one clean story, names, dates, recordings, making it impossible to bury. But something gnawed at me, not fear of retaliation. That I'd made peace with a long time ago. It was the weight of what it would mean. The engineer had been right when he told me they weren't afraid of technical failures. They were afraid of us knowing. I looked at the final transmission again, her voice repeating in my ears, quiet and steady. It's still with me. What would people do if they heard that? What would they think, knowing she hadn't returned alone? That whatever had brushed against her out there, beyond the reach of Earth, hadn't let go. Maybe they'd dismiss it, another conspiracy theory drowned out by the noise. Or maybe they'd look up at the sky differently, wondering, for the first time, whether the vast emptiness isn't as empty as we like to pretend. I closed the file. For now, I waited. Because some stories are heavier than they look, and once you let them out, there's no putting them back.